There's a specific kind of man who's vanishing from the world, and most people haven't noticed. Not because he's rare in absolute numbers, but because he's become invisible, unrecognizable, unsupported by the culture that once sustained him. He's the man who carries responsibility without complaint, who builds things that outlast him, who keeps his word even when it costs him, who stands firm on principle when everyone else is negotiating. The man who doesn't seek attention but commands respect, who protects without demanding gratitude, who creates order in chaos, not because someone's watching, but because disorder offends something deep in his character. Friedrich Nietzsche, writing in the 1880s, saw this disappearance coming. He watched it beginning in his own time and predicted it would accelerate. He called it the rise of the last man, and he described this figure with a contempt so visceral it still disturbs readers today. The last man, Nietzsche said, is the human being who has given up on greatness, on struggle, on becoming something more than comfortable. The last man wants safety, pleasure, equality of outcome, and above all, he wants to be left alone to enjoy his small pleasures without being challenged, judged, or asked to be better. The last man blinks. That's Nietzsche's image. A slow, satisfied blink of someone who's content, who's found his warm spot and has no intention of moving. The last man has invented happiness, he says, and he blinks. No striving, no suffering, no risk, no transformation. Just comfort, entertainment, and the slow atrophy of everything that makes human beings capable of greatness. What Nietzsche saw disappearing wasn't just good men in some moral sense. He saw the disappearance of the type of man capable of carrying culture forward, of creating values, of standing against the herd when the herd is wrong. He saw the death of the man who could say no to comfort in service of something greater. The man who could endure suffering for a purpose. The man who could build, protect, and transmit something valuable to the next generation. And he predicted that as this type disappeared, it would be replaced by something he found pathetic. Men who live for the weekend, who measure life in pleasures consumed, who avoid anything difficult or painful, who mock greatness as arrogance and reduce all virtue to not hurting anyone's feelings. Men without chests, as C.S. Lewis would later call them. Men who can discuss but not decide, critique but not create, consume but not build. Look around honestly at the landscape of modern masculinity and tell me Nietzsche was wrong. We're drowning in comfort, entertainment, distraction. We have more ease than any generation in history, and yet we're producing fewer men capable of carrying real weight. Fewer men willing to take on the burden of building something, protecting something, standing for something when the cost is high. The culture has made a specific trade. It offered men comfort, safety, and the freedom to pursue pleasure. And in exchange, it asked them to stop being dangerous, stop being assertive, stop being hierarchical, stop wanting to win, to dominate, to prove themselves, become harmless, agreeable, nice, become therapeutic clients, consumers, entertainers of themselves, become, in Nietzsche's terms, domesticated. And something in the male soul accepted this trade, especially over the past few generations. Men looked at the deal and thought, yes, I'll take the comfort, I'll take the entertainment, I'll give up the struggle, the competition, the pressure to prove myself. I'll become what the culture wants, safe, predictable, manageable. And in that acceptance, something vital began to die. Nietzsche wasn't romanticizing some past golden age. He knew that most men in most times were mediocre, content with the minimum, followers rather than leaders. But what concerned him was the systematic elimination of the conditions that allowed exceptional men to emerge. The cultural structures that demanded more, that honored strength, that created pathways for young men to test themselves against real challenges and discover what they were capable of. Those structures are vanishing. The initiations, the trials, the clear standards of manhood that every traditional culture maintained in some form. The expectations that separated boys from men, that marked the transition with difficulty that had to be overcome. Modern culture has largely abandoned these. We've made the path smooth, the standards flexible, the judgment suspended. We've prioritized inclusion over excellence, comfort over growth, safety over challenge. And the result, Nietzsche would say, is predictable. You get men who never fully form, who remain in a kind of extended adolescence, capable but uncommitted, talented but undisciplined, intelligent but without the force of will to channel that intelligence into anything that matters. You get men who know how to critique but not how to build, who can identify problems but lack the capacity to solve them, who consume culture but don't create it. The good man, in Nietzsche's vision, isn't good in the sense of being nice or compliant. He's good in the older sense, capable, strong, generative. He's someone who adds value to the world through his presence, who creates more order than chaos, more strength than weakness, more possibility than limitation. He is someone who takes responsibility, not because he is forced to, but because something in him demands it, who sees what needs doing and does it, regardless of recognition or reward. This type of man requires specific conditions to develop. He needs challenge that tests him, competition that sharpens him, standards that judge him honestly, failure that teaches him, pain that strengthens him. And he needs a culture that honors these qualities rather than apologizing for them. What we have instead is a culture that's deeply ambivalent about male strength, male competence, male assertion. A culture that sees these qualities as potentially dangerous, needing to be managed, controlled, softened. A culture that would rather have weak, harmless men than strong, potentially disruptive ones. And so it systematically undermines the conditions that create strong men while rewarding the conditions that create weak ones. Nietzsche saw this as a crisis not just for men, but for civilization itself. Because civilizations aren't built or maintained by the comfortable, the safe-seeking, the last men blinking contentedly in their warm corners. They're built by people willing to struggle, to sacrifice, to take on burdens that break most people. And if you systematically select against those people, if you make their lives harder while making the lives of the passive easier, you get exactly what you'd expect, fewer of them. Nietzsche had a phrase that captures something essential about his entire philosophy. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. It's been so overused, it's become a cliché, stripped of its original power. But understand what he actually meant. He wasn't offering a motivational platitude. He was describing a psychological and even physiological law. Human beings grow through resistance, through challenge, through the things that stress them without destroying them. A muscle grows by being torn. A bone strengthens where it's been fractured and healed. The immune system develops by encountering pathogens. The mind sharpens through difficult problems. Character forms through adversity that survived. This isn't metaphor. It's how adaptation works. You become capable of handling difficulty by handling difficulty, starting with manageable amounts and building tolerance over time. Traditional cultures understood this instinctively. That's why they built initiation rites, vision quests, tests of courage and endurance. They knew that boys don't become men automatically. Something has to break the comfortable dependence of childhood and force the development of adult capability. Usually, this involved real hardship, physical pain, isolation, fear, tasks that seemed impossible. The boy who completed these trials emerged changed, not just in how others saw him, but in how he saw himself. He'd proven he could endure, could face fear and not collapse, could suffer and not quit, could handle what seemed unbearable. And in proving this to himself, he developed what Nietzsche would call strength of will, the capacity to choose difficulty, in service of something valued rather than defaulting to ease. Modern culture has systematically dismantled these structures. We've removed most of the difficult transitions. We've smoothed the path, eliminated the tests, provided comfort and support at every stage. And we've told ourselves this is progress, that we're being more humane, more compassionate, protecting young people from unnecessary suffering. But Nietzsche would ask, what are you actually producing? And the answer, increasingly clear, is people, particularly men, who've never been tested, who've never discovered what they're capable of enduring, who've never had to push past the point where they want to quit, who've been protected from difficulty to the point where normal life challenges feel overwhelming. This isn't theoretical. Look at the data on male anxiety, depression, lack of purpose, failure to launch. Look at the number of men in their 20s and 30s still living with parents, still unsure what they want, still waiting for life to feel meaningful. Look at the epidemic of young men retreating into video games, pornography, and other simulated experiences because actual life feels too difficult, too demanding, too likely to result in failure. Nietzsche would see this as predictable. If you never challenge someone, if you protect them from all difficulty, you don't produce a happy, healthy person. You produce someone who's weak, fragile, incapable of handling the normal adversity that life inevitably brings. You produce the last man who wants only to be comfortable and is bewildered and resentful when life refuses to provide that comfort. The good man, in contrast, is someone who's been forged through difficulty, not destroyed by it, but shaped by it. He's encountered real challenges and developed real capacity. He knows what he can endure because he's endured it. He knows he can handle fear because he's faced it and continued anyway. He knows he can survive failure because he's failed, learned, and rebuilt. This creates a completely different psychology. The man who knows his own strength isn't arrogant, but he's not fragile either. He doesn't need constant validation because he's validated himself through action. He doesn't collapse when criticized because he's developed internal standards that matter more than external opinion. He doesn't avoid challenge because challenge is how he grows. But producing this kind of man requires what our culture increasingly refuses to provide: real standards, real consequences, real difficulty. It requires saying to young men, this is hard, and you need to do it anyway. You will fail, and you need to get up. You will be uncomfortable, and you need to endure it. Not because someone's cruel, but because that's how you become capable. Instead, we've adopted a therapeutic model that treats all discomfort as trauma, all difficulty as oppression, all failure as someone else's fault. We've created systems designed to protect people from negative experiences rather than prepare them to handle negative experiences. And the result is people who can't handle them. Nietzsche saw another dimension to this: the death of aspiration. The last man doesn't want to become anything greater than he is. He's satisfied. He's reached his plateau, and he's content there. The idea of striving, struggling, suffering to become something more strikes him as pointless. Why suffer when you could be comfortable? This is the psychology of decline. Not sudden collapse, but slow, comfortable decay. Generation by generation, you select for comfort-seeking over challenge-seeking. You honor the person who's found their balance, who's content, who's not causing trouble, who's not demanding anything difficult from themselves or others. And gradually, you lose the people who push boundaries, who attempt great things, who build what didn't exist before. The good man Nietzsche describes isn't satisfied. He's driven by what Nietzsche called will to power, though that phrase has been terribly misunderstood. Will to power isn't about dominating others. It's about the drive to expand your own capacities, to overcome your own limits, to become more than you currently are. It's the opposite of settling, of accepting, of being content with the minimum. This drive requires fuel, and the fuel is challenge. You need something to push against, something that tests you, something that requires you to grow or fail. Remove all resistance, and you remove the conditions for growth. Make everything easy, and you make growth impossible. Traditional masculine culture understood this and built it into everything. Sports that kept score, competitions with winners and losers, hierarchies that rewarded competence, physical challenges that demanded courage. Not to be cruel, but to provide the resistance necessary for development. Modern culture increasingly sees these structures as problematic. Hierarchies are oppressive. Competition creates losers. Keeping score damages self-esteem. Physical challenge risks injury. Better to make everything cooperative, egalitarian, safe. Better to ensure everyone feels good rather than ensure everyone develops capacity. But Nietzsche would see this as poison disguised as medicine. You think you're helping by removing challenge, but you're actually crippling. You're producing people who can function only in the artificial environment you've created, where all sharp edges are padded and all difficulties removed. And when they encounter the real world, which hasn't been sanitized, they break. The good man needs to be antifragile, in Nassim Taleb's later formulation. Not just resilient, able to withstand stress, but actually improved by it, using difficulty as raw material for growth. This is possible, but only if you're regularly exposed to difficulty in doses you can handle and overcome. Remove that exposure and you get the opposite: fragility, weakness, dependence on a protected environment. This is why Nietzsche was so contemptuous of the culture of his time and would be more so of ours. He saw it systematically destroying the conditions that create capable people while congratulating itself on its compassion. He saw it producing weaker generations and calling it progress. He saw it making people dependent and calling it care. And he predicted that this couldn't continue indefinitely. Eventually, you need capable people. When crisis comes, when things fall apart, when real challenges emerge that can't be solved by therapy or safe spaces or lowered standards, you need people who can actually handle difficulty. And if you've spent generations breeding that capacity out of people, you're in serious trouble. There's a passage in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where Nietzsche describes the last man, and it reads like a prophecy of our exact moment. The last man lives longest because he's discovered health and safety. He has as little pleasure for the day and as little pleasure for the night. He honors health above all. He's clever and knows everything that's ever happened. We have invented happiness, say the last men, and they blink. That blinking is Nietzsche's masterstroke. It's not a gesture of wisdom, but of satisfied stupidity. The last man thinks he's reached the end of human development. He's solved the problem of existence. Minimize suffering, maximize comfort, avoid anything difficult. He sees nothing beyond this. No higher state to aspire to. No transformation to undergo. Just the eternal present of mild pleasure and safety. And Nietzsche asks, what comes after this man? If an entire culture dedicates itself to producing and protecting the last man, what happens to the lineage of people capable of more? Where are the men who can carry culture forward, who can create new values, who can respond to crisis with something other than a demand to be saved? He saw this as the central crisis of modernity, the disappearance of what he called higher men. Not higher in some moral sense necessarily, but higher in capacity, in will, in creative power. Men capable of affirming life, even in its harshest aspects. Men who could look at suffering, difficulty, even tragedy, and say, yes, I want this, because this is what makes greatness possible. The last man can't do this. He looks at suffering and sees only something to be eliminated. He looks at difficulty and sees only something to avoid. He looks at tragedy and sees only unfairness. He has no framework for understanding these things as potentially valuable, as the very conditions that make human excellence possible. This is where Nietzsche's thought becomes genuinely challenging. He claimed that great human beings require great suffering, that artists need to know pain intimately to create work that matters. that leaders need to face real crisis to develop the judgment that saves others. That anyone attempting anything significant will encounter difficulty that would break most people, and only by enduring it can they achieve what they're attempting. Modern sensibility recoils from this. It sounds like valorizing suffering, like claiming pain is good. But Nietzsche wasn't saying suffering is good in itself. He was saying it's unavoidable in any serious human endeavor, and therefore, the question isn't how to eliminate it, but how to use it. The person who can transform suffering into art, pain into wisdom, difficulty into capacity, that person becomes something more than someone who's simply avoided suffering. The good man, in this framework, isn't the one who's had an easy life. He's the one who's had a difficult life and hasn't been destroyed by it, who's been beaten down and gotten up, who's failed and learned, who's suffered and grown, who carries scars but isn't broken. This type of man is disappearing partly because we're selecting against him culturally, but also because fewer men are willing to walk this path. Why endure suffering when you can avoid it? Why take on difficulty when ease is available? Why struggle when struggling isn't honored, when the culture says you're foolish for not taking the easier route? Nietzsche understood this temptation perfectly. That's why the last man wins in the short term. Comfort beats struggle in immediate appeal. Easy beats hard when there's no compelling reason to choose hard. Safe beats risky when risk isn't rewarded. The last man's way of life is more attractive to most people most of the time. But here is what Nietzsche saw that the last man doesn't. There is a cost to choosing comfort over growth, safety over challenge, ease over difficulty. The cost is paid in the slow diminishment of capability, the gradual narrowing of what you can handle, the progressive weakening of will. You become less. Not dramatically, not all at once, but incrementally. Every time you choose comfort over challenge, you're slightly weaker. Every time you avoid difficulty, you're slightly less capable. And over time, over years, this compounds. The good man makes the opposite choice. He deliberately seeks challenge. Not suffering for its own sake, but difficulty that demands growth. He puts himself in situations that test him, because he knows that's how capability is built. He doesn't wait for life to force growth on him. He pursues it. This creates a completely different trajectory. While the last man is maximizing immediate comfort and slowly weakening, the good man is often uncomfortable, but steadily strengthening. While the last man is protecting himself from challenge and becoming more fragile, the good man is embracing challenge and becoming more robust. Different choices, compounding in opposite directions. Nietzsche had a concept for this. Amor fati, love of fate. Not passive acceptance of whatever happens, but active affirmation. The ability to look at your life, including its hardest parts, and say, I wouldn't change this. Not because everything was pleasant, but because the difficult parts made you who you are. They carved capacity into you. They revealed strength you didn't know you had. They forced transformation you needed, but would never have chosen voluntarily. The last man can't love fate because his relationship to life is conditional. Life is acceptable only when it's comfortable. When it turns difficult, he resents it, fights it, demands it change. He wants life on his terms. And since life rarely cooperates, he lives in a state of low-grade resentment and disappointment. The good man loves fate because he's learned to see difficulty differently. Not as life being unfair, but as life offering exactly the challenge he needs to become who he's capable of being. This isn't delusional positive thinking. It's a trained perspective that sees challenge as opportunity, obstacle as the way forward, suffering as the price of significance. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic Emperor Nietzsche, both admired and criticized, understood this. He faced catastrophe after catastrophe, plague, war, betrayal, the deaths of children, and his response wasn't to ask why me, but to ask what this makes possible. What capacity does this demand I develop? What does this teach me about myself and about leadership? How can I use this? This is the psychology Nietzsche saw disappearing. The capacity to meet life on its own terms, rather than demanding it meet you on yours. The ability to say yes to difficulty, not because you enjoy it, but because you understand it's the admission price for anything worth doing. But this psychology has to be cultivated. It's not natural, not automatic. The natural response to difficulty is avoidance. You have to deliberately train yourself to move toward challenge rather than away from it, to seek out what tests you, to put yourself in situations where failure is possible and learn to handle it. Modern culture makes this harder by removing most of the traditional training grounds. No initiation rites, no mandatory service, no clear standards you must meet to be considered a man, no trials that separate those who can from those who can't. Just a smooth path where everyone advances regardless of capability, where standards are lowered to ensure inclusion, where the goal is making sure no one feels bad, rather than making sure everyone develops competence. Nietzsche would see this as cultural suicide. You can't build or maintain a civilization with people who've never been tested. Eventually, you need someone who can actually do the difficult things. And if you've systematically ensured no one develops that capacity, you're in existential trouble. The good man who is disappearing isn't a relic of a patriarchal past that we should celebrate leaving behind. He is a type of human being with specific capacities that civilizations require. The ability to take responsibility, to make hard decisions, to build under pressure, to protect what matters, to say no when no is necessary, to endure what breaks most people. These capacities don't develop in comfort. They develop through challenge. And they're disappearing because we've made challenge optional and comfort default. We've created a world where you can live your entire life without ever being truly tested, where you can remain weak and still survive. Survival, Nietzsche would say, is not enough. Not for individuals and not for cultures. The question isn't just can you survive, but what are you capable of creating, of building, of becoming? And if the answer is nothing beyond comfortable survival, you're already dead in the ways that matter. There is a question Nietzsche poses that cuts to the heart of everything. Would you live your life again, exactly as it was, infinitely? Every joy, every suffering, every triumph, every failure, every moment of beauty, and every moment of pain, repeated eternally in exactly the same sequence. Could you say yes to that? Would you want that? He called this the eternal recurrence, and he meant it as the ultimate test. Not of whether your life was pleasant, but whether it was worth living. Whether you'd lived with enough intensity, purpose, and affirmation that you'd choose it again, and again, forever. The last man fails this test immediately. His life is composed of small pleasures strung together, avoiding anything too intense, too difficult, too risky. Repeated infinitely, it would be unbearable. Even once is barely tolerable. He knows this at some level, which is why he medicates with entertainment, with distraction, with anything to avoid sitting with the emptiness of a life lived for nothing but comfort. The good man Nietzsche envisions passes this test, not because his life was easy, but because it was meaningful. He chose difficulty in service of something that mattered. He built something, created something, became something. And if he had to endure the suffering again to get the achievement again, he would, gladly, because the suffering was the price of the significance. This distinction reveals what's actually disappearing. Men willing to pay the price. Men who understand that anything worth doing is hard. Anything worth building takes sacrifice. Anything worth becoming requires suffering. Men who don't look for the easy path, because they know the easy path leads nowhere that matters. Modern culture has largely given up on this psychology. We've decided the price is too high, the suffering not worth it. Better to have comfort than greatness. Better to have safety than significance. Better to have everyone included at a lower level than some people excluded at a higher level. Better to have the last man blinking contentedly, than the higher man striving dangerously. And maybe that's a defensible choice. Maybe the age of great men is over, and what we need now is just competent, comfortable people who keep the systems running and don't cause trouble. Maybe Nietzsche was wrong to value greatness over contentment, struggle over ease, becoming over being. But then look at what we're actually producing. Not contentment, but anxiety and depression at epidemic levels. Not peace, but resentment and rage. Not satisfaction, but a knowing sense that something's missing, that life should mean more than this. The last man was supposed to be happy, but he's not. He's comfortable and miserable, protected and purposeless, safe and dying inside. Because comfort alone doesn't make life meaningful. Safety alone doesn't give you a reason to get up in the morning. Ease alone doesn't create the deep satisfaction that comes from overcoming something difficult. You need challenge. You need something to strive for. You need resistance to push against. Without these, you don't get happiness. You get the peculiar modern malaise of having everything and feeling nothing. The good man isn't disappearing because he's obsolete. He's disappearing because we're making it too hard for him to exist. We've removed the cultural support structures. We've eliminated the training grounds. We've made his values look foolish. We've rewarded the opposite qualities. And then we wonder why we have so few men capable of carrying real weight. But he's not gone completely. He still appears, usually in places and ways the mainstream culture doesn't notice or value. In small businesses built for nothing. In fathers raising children without recognition. In men doing difficult, necessary work without complaint. In soldiers, firefighters, builders, people who've chosen hard paths because someone has to. They're there, but they're increasingly isolated, unsupported, often mocked for not choosing the easier routes available. What Nietzsche understood is that these men are the ones who matter when things get serious. When there's a real crisis, a real threat, a real challenge that can't be solved by committees and can't be avoided by clever rhetoric, you need someone who can actually do the hard thing. And if you don't have those people, if you've spent generations selecting against them, you're vulnerable in ways you won't understand until it's too late. So what do you do with this? If you're a man reading this, the question is simple. Which type are you becoming? Are you choosing the path of the last man comfort, safety, ease, the avoidance of anything difficult? Or are you choosing the path of the good man challenge, growth, the deliberate embrace of difficulty in service of becoming capable? This isn't an abstract philosophical question. It's answered in daily choices. Do you choose the workout or the couch? The difficult conversation or the avoidance? The risky venture or the safe job? The discipline or the indulgence? The long-term build or the short-term pleasure? Every choice compounds. Every decision either strengthens or weakens. Nietzsche's warning is that the culture won't help you make the right choices. It will pull you constantly toward comfort, ease, safety. It will tell you that you deserve to relax, that you shouldn't have to struggle, that difficulty is oppression. It will offer you every possible excuse to choose the easier path. And if you accept those excuses, if you let yourself be shaped by a culture that values comfort over capability, you'll become the last man. You'll be safe, comfortable, and quietly desperate. You'll survive just fine, but you'll never discover what you could have been. The alternative is harder. It requires going against the cultural current. It requires choosing difficulty when ease is available. It requires building when consuming is easier. It requires discipline when indulgence is celebrated. It requires, in Nietzsche's terms, going up the mountain when everyone else is sliding into the valley. But the reward is that you become someone capable, someone who can handle difficulty, someone who creates value, someone who can meet crisis with strength rather than collapse, someone who, at the end of his life, can look back and know that he didn't waste it, that he became something, that his time here mattered. This is what's at stake in the disappearance of good men. Not some abstract cultural concern, but whether individual men will choose to develop their full capacity or settle for comfortable mediocrity. Whether they'll embrace the difficulty that creates strength or avoid it and remain weak. Whether they'll live lives worth repeating or lives they'd rather forget. Nietzsche's prediction was that most people would choose comfort, that the last man would win by default, that the good man would become rare, isolated, eventually extinct. But predictions aren't fate, they're warnings. And the warning is, if you want to be more than the last man, you have to choose it, deliberately, daily, against the cultural current. No one will make this choice for you. No one will force you to become capable. The culture will actively discourage it. But the path is still there, waiting. The difficult, rewarding, meaning-creating path of choosing challenge over comfort, growth over stagnation, becoming over being. The good man isn't disappearing because he must. He's disappearing because most men are choosing not to become him. The question is, what will you choose? If this opened your eyes, subscribe to Boring History, because the truth is never boring.